Welcome back to the Bullpen Mafia. We have a special guest with us today, the founder of Fish on First, Ely Sussman. Ely, thanks so much for joining the Mafia.
It's a pleasure to be on with you guys. Enjoyed talking to you before. Loyal listener of the pod as well. And yeah, you guys always make me laugh. And I have a feeling this is going to be a great time.
Ely, you got Eric in Marlins gear. We have not seen that in a very, very long time. So I don't know if it was the Ely effect, Clayton McCullough effect. Long story short, we're in the shadow of Lone Depot Park. Toad is back.
The hiring of Clayton McCullough has me feeling very optimistic and excited for the offseason winter meetings, for opening day. And we had to have our guy Ely come on and break down all of this for us, the McCullough hiring and what to expect going into the offseason.
We have a ton of stuff we want to cover with Ely, but I think, for our listeners, we have Petey in the Northeast. He's in Red Sox La La Land. We want to make sure that everybody that's listening exactly understands your story, Ely. We always ask our guests, it's kind of our first question with major leaguers, their call-up story. But I think for you, kind of give us the backstory of Fish on First and how you're so plugged into, the Miami Marlins, especially you're living in New York. So how has this journey all sort of transpired? Walk us through all that background.
Yeah, I think among all your guests, I'm the one that I was always the furthest away from actually playing in the big leagues or having any sort of role with
you, Eric, and I have a lot in common. We're not big leaguers.
See, yeah, I am a New York native, and I'm back in New York now. In the middle, I went to University of Miami. Go Canes!
Go Canes!
And
baby.
when I was down there, that intersected with the opening of Marlins Park at the time during my tenure at UM. And it just really organically, I started following the team a lot more after growing up as a Yankees fan while I was down in Miami, following the team there. After I graduated, I also got a part-time job. I don't tell a lot of people this, but I got a part-time job through MLB right out of school, where I was what they called a data caster. And this position definitely does not exist anymore. But when you're following game day on your phone, and they still have game day, of course, but back then, like, you had to pay a person to go to the ballpark and physically enter every single pitch. You had to click on something. You had to type in the letters. You had to send a code so that people on the other ends just watching on their phone knew what happened with every single pitch. And they needed people.
Ely, what kind of power is that? What kind of power is that? You're behind the blue button with the in-play runs.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it was. And there's some horror stories in there where you press the wrong button and it's really hard to undo what you
Wait, time out. Yeah. What was your worst horror story? You're going to say it right now on the Mafia. What was your worst data caster horror story?
I mean, it's just falling really far behind where you enter the code the wrong way or something happens. Usually it was with replay, when instant replay gets involved, and there was still replay back then. And when they end up overturning a call and you have to somehow go back and rearrange that and change the code of what actually happened on the play. And if you don't do it and you fall behind, and I'm just like tapping the guy on the shoulder next to me to get me caught up on what happened in every pitch since then. But I mean, there was at least one time where I just remember where I got totally lost and the way to give up. Like back then, there were situations where you get screwed up so bad that they just shut it down. And it's like, well, the people on the other end, the thing just cuts off. It's just frozen for them. They don't get the rest of the game. That happened at least once or twice. So this was only one season that I did it for, and it wasn't like every game.
It makes sense why they didn't have you back for the second one.
They did not officially fire me. The way that I remember it, I probably could have gone back, but so there were ups and downs to it. And yeah, this is a big diversion, I guess, from what we're planning to get into. Anyway, that is how I got pretty familiar with Marlins Park at the time, where I was a credentialed media member. I wasn't covering the team as media that year, but I was a broadcast journalism graduate anyway. That's something that I thought about going in at the time. This was an interesting side hustle, an interesting experience. And I just got really fascinated in the team. I started covering them per Fish Stripes at the time, the Marlins affiliate of SB Nation, back in
that's a throwback.
Like 2016 or something. But pretty quickly I started running the place, honestly, due to just a lack of interest from other people on the staff. Like there was the guy that brought me in after a couple of years. He's someone else that was not based in Miami. He was based all the way on the other side of the country. And one day, right before coincidentally, right before opening day 2018, right before this official start of the Sherman Jeter era, he just walks away. He says, I don't want to spend my time on this. Somebody take it over. And I kind of just took it and ran with it in that way. I just started covering the Marlins from there. And I guess the big step was getting with this whole new administration at all levels. Even though this was supposed to be an old school blog, the idea was just to cover it, just to write from your basement about how you felt about the Marlins. But I just reached out to the people that actually do PR for the team, and pretty quickly we got credentials to cover games. I recruited people that were still living in Miami to like work with me. And it's like, you get to cover games, and it's hard to get in your foot in the door with that unless you're with one of these big legacy outlets. And pretty quickly that built up from there, where people enjoyed getting the access. They behaved themselves pretty well, so they didn't take away the access from us. We made a lot of mistakes in those early days, and the team was bad in 2018 and 2019, but it built up pretty well, and I enjoyed it so much. Like I don't know if I was planning to do this for this many years, covering this Marlins team, especially the way things have gone on the field. I just have a lot of fun and enjoyment from it. I know I'm filling a hole that existed, that there just wasn't a whole lot of other people covering the team outside of MLB.com and some of those legacy outlets that have been around forever, that we're plugging a hole on the online side while also having that in-person perspective when covering the team as well. We just built up from there and there and there. And then we just reached a point where I felt we got too big for what SB Nation was trying to do, because they still just wanted us to be bloggers in our basement. And I was trying to send people to cover every single home game and some road games, like 100 games a year.
Wow.
And they didn't really factor that in. I'm thinking, if we want to sustain this, if we want to have room to bring more people here, then we might as well do it on our own, do it independently. So me personally, I just like grew away. We just grew apart, me and SB Nation. And so there came a time that was only a year and a half ago where we officially split up. And so I had to start the new outlet independently, and I couldn't use the old name Fish Stripes. So I tried to split the difference and use something that was recognizable to the audience we previously had, while also not doing anything illegal and not like taking the name from this outlet that technically still exists. You could go to fishstripes.com, and the last articles there are from me and my staff in like May 2023. It has been deserted ever since. So we had to start fresh. We had to get the new logo and new branding around it, but it's all the same people. We just brought everybody that was with me back then, and we've added several new people since then that have made us bigger and better than ever. We've reached a point where we get to continue to push boundaries in terms of what level of coverage that we do on the Marlins, and just covered in certain angles that you just won't get anywhere else.
Well, I mean, Eric and I are certainly thankful that you guys do all that you do, because I think, to your point, you definitely do fill a void for myself, for Eric, for Marlins fans out there that are, yearning for that coverage. And, there have been some lean years, Eli, and I think, taking this to present day, Marlins are fresh off a 100-loss season, Eli. Obviously, Peter Bendix's first year with the organization. A lot of downs, probably a lot more downs than ups. In your estimation, you watched a lot of these games. How do you grade Peter Bendix in year one?
It is hard to be concise about this. I will try and give him a C grade for this first year, and I'll try to get into why. On the positive stuff that he's done relatively well, you could start with the trade deadline, where I felt that was a very big step in terms of adding a lot of talents at several different levels of this organization, getting good value for players that I didn't feel were truly crucial to building a contending team long-term, whether it was the combination of relievers, some of the hitters on this team as well, that I felt could have been churned for guys that were younger, that had more control. And if you just look at the value that he got in some of those deals, I think he did really well on that front. So that matters. And then if you really want to get granular with some of the low profile moves that he made throughout the season in terms of waiver claims and picking up minor league free agents, they're doing something right in terms of, from afar, being able to analyze these guys that are disposable on other teams and turning them into really good relievers, or turning them into an everyday second baseman like Otto Lopez, stuff like that. I think those are really encouraging signs in terms of what they're doing behind the scenes to pick up on things that a lot of other teams aren't. So that seems to be an advantage that Marlins have under this new administration compared to some of their competition. But then you look at the downside, and this is not a unique opinion that I have. I think others have articulated it even better, that one of the skills that you're supposed to have when you're a GM or president of baseball operations, it is part of the job to convince your owner to spend money. That's part of it. That's what makes Dave Dombrowski a future Hall of Famer, among other guys. There is a certain level of leadership that is important in that role. If your team's going to be successful, no matter how you're going to do it on the field from baseball side, money helps. Money helps a lot. And to this point, I think a frustration that a lot of Marlins fans have with Bruce Sherman as an owner is he just doesn't spend a whole lot of money, even relative to other owners his team has had. To this point, 1 year in, Bendix, for whatever reason, did not very successful last offseason in terms of getting the Marlins to spend much money. I mean, their big signing was Tim Anderson last year, and that could not have gone any worse. To this point, in terms of there hasn't been any contract extensions for notable players that we've seen so far. Even though this is ultimately, that's an ownership level responsibility, there is a partnership there. There is a role that that executive has to play. You could just look back at Kim Ng and look at examples where she got, when she wanted to buy something with Bruce's money, she was able to do it. She was able, it did not go well. She was able to get Avi Garcia signed to a 4-year deal that no other team was going to be willing to offer. They blew all other teams out of the water with that offer of that contract. They got it done. They screw up on the Gene Segura signing immediately. It goes awful. They want to get out from under it within a few months of that deal going into effect. And Kim says, Bruce, this is what we could do. We could take on Josh Bell's contract. It's even more money, but it's going to make our team better. And he does it, and it works. And that's something that I think goes overlooked in terms of during that final year under the previous GM, the willingness that they had to spend money and how different it looks this time, the lack of creativity in terms of being able to do things with money. And to this point, Bendix hasn't shown that he's willing to push the envelope on that. I think in terms of public relations, it hasn't gone great with Bendix. I've been a little bit surprised that he's taken all this media role onto himself in terms of addressing them in press conferences after notable transactions. Well, where right now he has an assistant GM in Gabe Kapler, who's a former manager and is used to speaking to the media every single day. But when Bendix does it, I mean, you could just be straight with it. He lies to people, I think, at a higher rate than most executives do when he's speaking publicly to them. And fans don't buy that. I think it's turned a lot of people off in terms of their willingness to trust what he's doing when he's just not transparent about his intentions, about his decisions on certain players in those dealings, in terms of providing details about really innocent questions sometimes that my staff and other media have with that. The fact that he's not willing to disclose that stuff is frustrating. There are, you could go behind the scenes a little bit. For example, like the last time that he spoke to a big group was right after the season ended. He had an end of season press conference as they usually do. And then the very next day we get word that dozens of people got fired. And he strategically did that, where the last day he speaks to the media, he waits. And then after everybody goes away, then he informs all these people in various departments that were inherited from the previous organization that they got let go. I thought that was a cowardly move, the way to go about it. Instead of doing that when you knew you were making those decisions, being willing to face the music and like address why certain people were let go, he waits to kind of hide away from that responsibility there. Those sort of little things, the intangible leadership components of it, make me nervous from that standpoint. And then I want to just take a moment. My favorite podcast I recorded this year on Fish on First was with a longtime Marlins employee, one of the guys that got fired. He was an analyst named Bradley Woodrum, and he worked under Michael Hill and under Kim Ng and under Peter Bendix. And the way that he kind of articulated is that under the previous GMs, analytics were one of the tools that they took into battle. And then under Bendix, what he immediately noticed is that there's this desire to develop analytics not as a tool, but as the glue that held everything together. I don't know how you can totally buy into that idea that everything has a number to it, that the analytics are going to make all these big decisions for the teams without accounting for scouting, and certain circumstances that players are in, the fact that they're seemingly pushing in that direction, relying so heavily on the numbers, it could get you little advantages. I don't know how that leads to a championship team. When you look at the most successful franchises across the league, they can't be so dependent on that. And so the way that to this point he's looking in that direction, I just think you're going to need a whole lot of more proof of concept in order to feel that the Marlins are totally on the right track with that as their philosophy.
Well, then I'm surprised they hired Clayton McCullough and not the first AI manager that they can just plug in into an algorithm and spit out the best lineup that they want.
That's a good point. Yeah, and wait to see exactly how much managing McCullough does on his own. That's been a trend in baseball about trying to pin down what a manager's responsibilities and authority is these days, with the influence that front offices now have, not just on the Marlins, but a lot of other teams, when it comes to setting lineups and taking advantage of certain matchups. We're recording this before the official presser that McCullough does with Bendix right there. But and that was, if you want to get into it a little more, just a bit of a surprising hire, just because they personally hadn't worked together before with Bendix and McCullough right there. This is someone that I'm sure he had some familiarity with, either through mutual friends or some other smaller interactions. But that was, after a pretty long process, somewhat of a surprising result.
Eli, you mentioned, I think in terms of, putting a bow on last season, one of the things of, Bendix, I guess, sort of the way he handled the PR aspect of last season. One thing that really struck a chord with Eric and I was his proclamation that the Marlins weren't going to make the playoffs in early May, right? He basically went out in front of the media, something that probably was an internal notion. Everybody kind of understood we weren't going to be a playoff club, but he went out in front after they traded Luis Ariz and said, hey, we are not making the playoffs. This is not a playoff team. Marlins were 9-26 at the time. Granted, they were way out of the race, but that was probably something that struck a chord with Skip Schumacher. A couple weeks later, they agreed to mutually terminate their option. He's not coming back. What are we going to miss about Skip, Eli? I think, he had such a good rapport with the players, a former player. He had, an understanding with some of the role guys. He was a role guy. I think a lot of the Marlins players kind of resonated with Skip. What are we going to miss about Skip going into 2025?
Yeah, he checked so many boxes that you look for in a manager right there. And even with the team's record, like, it's a rare example where a team performs so badly, and yet I think most people can agree it's not on the manager. It's not on mistakes that he made per se. I mean, the level of detail that he still put into game prep as the season went on, and it didn't take long, as you mentioned, for him to realize that the season wasn't going anywhere, but still the level of preparation he puts into what he was doing and the level of thought he put into it. I remember it was really only in the middle of the season where I was like talking to my staff, and I was telling them that when you're talking to Skip moving forward, these wins and losses don't really matter at this point. And then he just kept reminding us as that they kind of do. Like, he would keep talking about it the same way, and he would continue to explain his decisions the same way in September as he was back in April, in terms of why he was putting guys in certain situations, all coming down to putting them in situations where you think they can be successful, unless the game is totally out of hand, at which point you're just counting down the outs and trying to get out of there. So he really understood on a lot of levels. He connected with people very well. He continued to just be he still had a fire in him despite what was happening on the field. I think that might be one contrast between him and McCullough, just personality wise. I enjoyed that Skip got really fired up about certain things with umpires, or sometimes even with his own guys on his team. Like, he could be an intimidating presence. And I think he played really well into that. That was part of his leadership style, that he wasn't going to beat you up, but he just had that intensity about him and that work ethic that I think rubbed off on people. And it set a good example for everybody on his group. At the end of the day, he was still just self-deprecating. He really deferred to his coaches as well. Like, he would look for little examples in terms of to get those guys the flowers they deserve for certain things that they contributed to as well. So he had just a really great balance of, I think, what it takes to succeed in that role. So now we know for at least 1 year with the Rangers, he's going to be taking a step back as a special advisor. I just have no doubt that he's going to pretty soon be a major league manager again with a different team.
Eli, when you look at, I guess, we encapsulated 2024, Skip's no longer around. We as fans had such an appreciation for Skip. I think, the Marlins fan base had been so longing for a winner. And I think 2023 gave us a taste of that, right? We hadn't had a winner in such a long time. And Skip felt like such a huge part of that. It's sad to see him go. On the flip side, we've heard a ton of great things about Clayton McCullough. He has you mentioned hasn't worked directly with Bendix, but has worked with Gabe Kapler in the past in the Dodgers organization. So there is some familiarity there. There's something to look forward to, at least with McCullough. Hopefully he gets a clean slate and gets the ability to see some of these players through and develop some of these younger players. I think one of the things that Eric and I spoke about prior to this was the development of some of the younger guys in the roster, right? The Xavier Edwards, the Otto Lopez that you alluded to earlier on. Where do you see some of those guys going into 2025? Do you think Xavier Edwards is the everyday shortstop? Does Otto Lopez get a real chance at playing second base every single day? What is the Marlins, the youth movement that they had the last 65, 70 games? Who can we expect to be everyday regulars from that group?
Xavier Edwards is the most fascinating one. I was a bit of a skeptic on him entering last year because
I think we all were. I think Eric and I had spoken about it. We didn't know if this was just a flash in the pan and if, a couple good weeks and all of a sudden he's probably the best player on the Miami Marlins all season long.
Yeah, it got people excited last year. He won a AAA batting title. Woo! You can look at the list of guys that win AAA batting titles, and it just does not cross over all that well to the major league game. So I just didn't know how that would translate offensively. I was really worried about him defensively, and but in every aspect of the game, he was just a little bit better than anybody could have reasonably thought coming into this. It wasn't just compiling a whole lot of hits, but his discipline has continued to get better ever since he joined the organization. Like if he draws his walks, if he gets himself into good counts, then I think it's pretty legit that he's going to be on the higher end of all baseball in terms of guys that actually get on base. And once he gets on base, he's a special base runner. He's not just a plus runner. He's a double plus. Like he's really impactful. One that's going to be difficult to find elsewhere. Once he became that everyday shortstop, it was him and Ohtani the rest of the way in terms of base stealing across baseball during that second half of the season. He was in that type of elite company. So that in itself is really valuable. It seemed that the ship had sailed on him as a shortstop, just mainly because of his arm. His arm just has not been quite the same since he had an original shoulder injury back in like 2022. It got a little bit better this year than it was in the minors the year before, to the point where he could fake it as shortstop, and he has enough of the other skills to sometimes mask that. I'm still worried about that. I'm not totally bought in on him being a shortstop. Ultimately, it depends what you do offensively. The Marlins, they had Hanley Ramirez as their shortstop for a while, and he was a negative there for a while. But if you produce enough value on the other side of the ball, then you can live with it, because it is hard to find shortstops elsewhere. And even ones that are really good defensively, so few of them are able to help you with the bat. And I'm really excited about what he can do offensively. The concern just comes back to, in all likelihood, his best position is second base. And you mentioned Otto Lopez as somebody else that jumped onto the scene this year. And he's the one that ideally would be the fixture in second base. He's the one that on that defensive side, it was really impressive what he did this past year. And really in both of their cases, but especially in Lopez's cases, they got him for nothing. They got him off the waiver wire early in the year. They sent him to the minors initially. And for him to just step up the way that he did, he slumped in the middle of the year. And then at the end of the year, for a pretty significant stretch, he was consistent again as a hitter in a way that he's a surefire big leaguer. I don't know if he's an everyday player, but he is so much more than anybody could have realistically thought when they acquired him in the first place earlier in the year. So my main concern, bigger picture, is how the defensive pieces fit together when they have those guys, when they have Connor Norby as well. They have all these players that I think their best position is second base, but you can only put one player at a time. So that is the issue they're going to run into moving forward. And it's fascinating. I think I just wonder how long it's going to be until they shuffle the pieces again, where if these guys are all best fitting at the same position, but they're all valuable big leaguers, then that leads you to the point where, hey, which one of them is a trade candidate in order to get somebody that more specifically fits our needs? But for 2025, it's shaping up to be one of those plain and simple, let the kids play type of years, where it's not so much worrying about how the pieces specifically fit together, because you're not totally fixated on making the playoffs in that particular year. I mean, that'd be a great outcome to be competitive whatsoever. It's more so about figuring out which of these guys are legit big leaguers. You could figure out the rest later if they could show that they can all hit at this level. And at least they got several young guys. They're young, they're inexpensive, and they're somewhat versatile. And they're showing signs that they can at least hit a little bit, which was for so many of the last few years, simply scoring runs has been the big challenge right now. So I think that is the one thing that they're hoping to take a significant step forward in terms of just putting together what they think could be a deep lineup of guys that can give you something with the bat.
The Baltimore Orioles, they built their roster on shortstops. The Miami Marlins, second baseman. Who would have thought?
Pre-shift, it might have worked, right? The pre-shift rules, it might have been a viable strategy, but I guess death by 1,000 second basemen is the Marlins 2025 strategy.
Eli, you brought up Norby, and the trade deadline was probably one of the more, if not the most memorable moment of this past season. Of the guys acquired in the Jazz trade, Luis Arise, of that bunch, that group of fresh faces, who can we expect to see in the major league lineup? Who do you think is going to take a step forward? And of the group, maybe if you had to pick one guy, who could be an all-star?
I am fascinated by Agustin Ramirez. I'm not saying I'm totally sold on him. I'm fascinated by him. He's the one that hasn't appeared in the big leagues yet. He was the headliner of the Jazz trade from the Yankees. He was having a breakout season in the Yankee system. I remember the reaction to the trade. People were really upset at the time because he was way down on a lot of prospect rankings just because he emerged so suddenly last year in the Yankee system that most people didn't see it coming. He is such a complete offensive player. Like, he made the trade, coming over in the trade and joining the new team down the stretch of AAA. He hit at a really high level for somebody that's still just 23 years old. He's in the same general age range as these other guys. And the combo of power and discipline that he has such a beautiful and powerful swing too, that I think he's such a safe bat moving forward. I should mention he is a catcher. And you mentioned that last because he's a catcher for now. And that's the huge question moving forward, is whether he sticks there, because he's struggling there in the minors enough in basically every facet of catching, in terms of receiving, in terms of blocking. He has this weird hitch in his mechanics in terms of throwing, where he's like a strong arm, but it just takes him a while to get it from the glove to the hand. And there's so many times I watched a lot of his defense. This is the kind of effort I put in to cover the Marlins, watching all these replays of him allowing stolen bases just because he drops the ball so much with that transfer. Things that I wonder how much of these aspects are fixable moving forward. I feel like some of it is. And if it is, and he can stick at the position, at least on a part-time basis, that's super valuable to this team that just hasn't gotten much offense whatsoever from the catching position the last few years. I think he's the best position player prospect that this team has right now, just because the bat is so promising. The question is how early we see them, and we could see him. It really depends what sort of improvement he shows as a catcher coming into camp in spring training compared to where he was last year, how much of his offseason he put into cleaning that stuff up. And if there is like really noticeable progress, then I see no reason why he can't be on the opening day roster in a pretty significant role. And if not that, I think he still comes up soon after, just because the bat is so clearly ready at this point.
Well, if Juan Soto isn't playing right field for the Marlins, maybe we throw him in right field and that strong arm can be firing darts to second and third base.
We got a lot of creative ideas here, Eli. I mean, as scorned Marlins fans, we'll take anything at this point.
Hey, there's mystery teams, according to our guy, Bob Nightingale and Jeff Passan. Anything is possible. Hey, they see Soto at what seems like every single University of Miami basketball game.
Yeah.
Okay. So
I want to say there is like a photo circulating of that featuring one of my staff writers, Daniel Rodriguez, that was taken a couple of years ago. And I don't know who put it out there like a couple of years later. It's not a recent photo of him.
I think Eric was there.
Guess what, Eli? I was at that game, and my buddy and I have friends, luckily, in the UM athletic department, and I get a text middle of the workday. Hey, we have 2 empty courtside seats for the game against FIU tonight. Do you want to go? I was like, I'm not going to say no to any courtside seats, right? My buddy and I, Brandon Fernandez, he's a big fan of basketball. We go to the Canes game. We get these VIP passes. We're sitting courtside during warmups. Guess who sits immediately to our left? Juan Soto.
That was your chance, to pitch him on the
Yeah.
Marlins.
I think he had just gotten traded to the Yankees too.
Yeah, had to have been.
But absolutely wild. So that's why I think, there's a chance he likes the Gables.
Are we in the sweepstakes, Eli? Is this your chance to let us know? Break it on the Mafia.
No, we're in the, just like every other team, the every 2 years sweepstakes where he visits as a even if he's in the American League, he comes back, comes to Miami every 2 years to play against the team. That's a big treat. I enjoy that change in the baseball schedule.
We're gonna get
to steer every single star, and they didn't get Ohtani, but wow, wasn't that special when he had that game to get him to 50-50 at the end of last year? That was one of the highlights of the entire season, even though it came against the Marlins as well. That was
Ohtani loves Marlins Park, man.
Yeah, that's what you look forward to with Soto, is that maybe he has one of those type of games in Miami as a visiting player, but not on the Marlins.
Eli, we had to. I think obviously we talk about some of the needs of this team, and one definite area of strength is the pitching staff. I think Clayton McCullough is inheriting probably one of the better pitching staffs in the National League when you get a healthy Sandy Alcantara, Yuri Perez, Jesus Luzardo. You got Weathers, Meyer, Garrett, Edward Cabrera in some capacity. We don't know exactly what they're going to look like, but a definite strength for this ball club. The big elephant in the room is they got like 6 or 7 guys. Some of these guys are going to get flipped, whether it's before the season, at the deadline. Who's the most likely trade candidate out of that bunch?
I look at Edward Cabrera just because they were close to flipping him at this time, not this time a year ago, but right before the start of spring training. There were those intense talks with the Pirates. They got pretty far down the road with dealing him to Pittsburgh a year ago. What he's done since then, it's complicated because he got hurt entering last year. He got off to then a terrible start when he was healthy. Then he got hurt again. And then the second half of the year, he was very good and very consistent down the stretch. I'd say his most consistent stretch overall as a major league starter, even though there were still some holes in there, some hiccups. I've been personally, I've been kind of low on Cabrera. I feel like people they fall into the trap of looking at how special his changeup, how unique his changeup is, that he is really difficult to hit overall when he's on the field. But overall, there's just like so many questions about him actually being valuable to your team because of the injury history. Every single year, it's something physically that keeps him out. And just like, the little things where he still doesn't have full conviction in his fastball, which is such a head scratcher for a guy that has the kind of velo that he has, but he uses it so sparingly. I don't know what it's going to take to get through to him. What I keep referring people back to is how he's been one of the constants. He's been here for a long time. He was signed and developed by the Marlins. He's been in this organization for 9 years at this point. He had a bunch of years working with one of the best pitching coaches in the game with Mel Stoudemire Jr., and yet he was still making the same mistakes and falling into the same patterns that, again, I don't know exactly how the team feels. I know that they were willing to trade him a year ago, and I can understand why, just because if there's another team that is optimistic about him as a starting pitcher long-term, then more power to them. I think more likely you're going to reach a point where, in order to, if anything else, just to keep him healthy and on the field, to reduce his workload, he gets moved to the bullpen. I think it would make, I don't know if you call it selling high because of how uneven his last year was. Given the way he finished, maybe there is a team that values him highly enough in order to make a trade worthwhile. He's the one that I think is most obvious of that group because of that. More of a sleeper would be Braxton Garrett. Like, his value is down a little bit. Well, maybe more than a little bit from last year because of his own injury, because the way that he struggled when he was healthy. From what I can tell about this Marlins team, they put a pretty big value on quality of stuff. I mean, they'll just have their fingers crossed that guys are going to stay healthy. Given last year shows that anybody could get hurt on the pitching side because everybody was hurt, it seems, for a stretch of time. So even though there's like this conventional thinking that if you don't throw super hard, that you're less likely to get hurt, I think they're at a point where with Braxton Garrett that they probably don't value him quite as much as everybody else might think, despite the success he had back in 2023. For somebody that just has a little smaller of a ceiling because of his lesser velocity, because it's going to be more predicated on commanding and being really sharp with his command moving forward. I think that is somebody that they might feel is somewhat expendable. And whether it's during the offseason or maybe more likely once he gets a chance to at least reestablish himself as a quality pitcher at the big leagues, I could see Braxton being moved as well. Another one like Eddie that has spent his whole professional career in this Marlins organization. It's cool to have continuity, as Bendix has shown. Like he is not going to hesitate to flip some of the guys that he inherited from the previous administration.
Eli, I think, Eric brought this up yesterday. I think it was a tremendous point. The Mel Stottlemyre, right? We had some of these players that's all they've known. He's been their pitching coach the last 6-7 years in the organization. Guys that grew up in the big leagues with Mel. It's a massive loss. What are you hearing about who's going to fill that position? What does that look like? Have you heard any rumblings of who Clayton McCullough might bring along with him?
It's a safe bet that it'll be somebody a bit younger. That I think there was a point. This is somewhat that disconnect I mentioned earlier, where I think moving forward, there's just going to be this pretty heavy reliance on analytics in terms of all aspects of the team, making players better, coming up with suggestions that make sense for the skill set that they have. Mel, a dinosaur might be overstating it, but he was certainly erred on the side of being old school and like explaining the way that you're like all the finer points of pitching and how certain everything fits together, how your arsenal fits together, how people should prepare in between their outings. He made guys so much better, but it didn't necessarily derive from using analytics to do that. So I expect it to be somebody that has more of a background like that. There is a hire they made last year around this time, Brandon Mann, who was their pitching strategist last year. I don't think he's going to be elevated to that position. I just bring it up in terms of somebody whose background might fit a little bit better with what they're looking for, where he himself was a former big league pitcher as well. But immediately, even before he retired, he just got really fluent in terms of the technology that's being used to help these guys train and learn more about their arsenals and to come up with new suggestions. So there's still some candidates out there. I mean, one of the other dinosaurs that just came off the market was Brent Strom, who was most recently with the D-backs. He got hired elsewhere. So he's off the market at this point. He's most famous, of course, for being with the Astros during their first championship run. So that's, in terms of specific names, I couldn't offer one in particular other than
not a dinosaur.
Yeah, not a dinosaur. There's going to be an anti-dinosaur movement, I suppose.
Eli, we're gonna get one fun segment, but before we do, I'm gonna put all of us on the spot here. Are the Marlins win-loss wise, are they better than last year? I'm gonna start with myself. I say yes. I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. I'm not saying they're a playoff team. I'm saying that they're going to do better than 100 losses, 62. I think there's a 70 to 72 win team next year.
I'm not going to give you a specific number, but I think they're going to be improved just based on the fact that there's no way that the pitching staff is going to be as unhealthy as they were last year. And if you get a solid number of starts from Yuri and Sandy, you think that number in the win column is going to be higher. I don't know how much higher because we need to score runs, but
and we need to get less second baseman.
Yeah.
I think they'll be a little bit better, little bit, like threading the needle where, I really could see it go either way. The way that, if you look at the one reason why my grade on Peter Bendix was incomplete is because we still need to find out whether or not this terrible season resulted in the number one MLB draft pick, how the lottery plays out.
Yeah.
That is still an unknown in terms of this past year. I bring that up just because with the system now, there's this narrow window where it makes any sense to tank because you can't win the lottery every single year. You can only be bad for 2 years in a row and still be eligible for it. They have I'm just saying they have like incentives to almost not win games this past year while they're still eligible for that. All those starting pitchers they have, if they do stay healthy, then they're just going to be so tempting to deal them and cash them in at this point. Even though the farm system took a step forward this past year, it's still got a way to go in terms of actually lining up the talent that I think realistically is going to make this a consistently good team. So there's going to have to be some bit of a trade-off there. So I think that lowers the ceiling on the team a lot, but I think to this point, there's on track to be a few games better than they were last season.
Just a couple.
The internet's forever, just like the moratorium that is SB Nation with all your final posts on fish stripes. We will have this forever. We'll come back to this in the middle of next year and see where we're at. But this is our fun segment, Eli. We love to do this stuff. Toad and I are massive nostalgia junkies. We're gonna do a snake draft, and Toad is a commissioner of the snake draft. Toad, we're doing Miami Marlins, right? So simply, if they've never won a Florida Marlins jersey.
Okay, for context, let's back it up even further. In the beginning of the season, we had Legends of Date on. He runs Giancarlo DeVito. He runs a nostalgia-based Marlins account highlighting epic moments from the Florida Marlins era. So when we had him on, the snake draft was your favorite Florida Marlins, guys who exclusively played for the Florida Marlins. Our snake draft will be guys who, for the most part, for the majority of their careers, played, or the time that they played for the Marlins, they were Miami Marlins.
Okay, fair.
Eli, you are the guest. This is a snake draft. So when you pick last in the round, you get two.
Come back around, yeah.
So Eli, you're a guest. Fish on first. You're picking for your website, for your publication. Who is your favorite Miami Marlin of all time?
Jose Fernandez. And he's a start to finish Miami Marlin. He came up, of course, the second year after the rebrand right there. Every time he was on the mounds, not just effective, but electric, infectious in a way that it's now been a long time. It's been way longer since he's been gone than he was here. And yet there just hasn't been anybody really close to him that draws people in and that gets you dreaming about what could be. And for what he accomplished in such a short time, especially all the time when he was in Miami, like the impact that he had in that ballpark for people watching it, whether you were in person or watching from afar, the way that he resonated with people outside the Marlins fan base as well. He was such a great ambassador for the team while we had him.
As draft commissioner, I'll go last. Javier, go ahead.
I had Jose on my short list, Eli, so you snagged that one for me. I'm going to go with a friend of the Mafia, friend of PD and mine, former teammate, Garrett Cooper. Garrett was a Marlin for quite a bit. People don't realize he was here for parts of 6 seasons with the Marlins. I think he really got his real chance at Major League Baseball. And we knew Garrett from our time with the Milwaukee Brewers. He was with the Brewers, got traded to the Yankees to the Marlins, and really got a shot here. Dealt with injuries, but I think that 2020 season, the COVID-shortened playoff season, was his coming out party. Had a really great year. He had some epic moments at Wrigley Field. I know Eric and I were talking about that earlier today. A guy who loved this city, loved being a Miami Marlin. Garrett Cooper, Miami Marlin in our hearts, but also my favorite Miami Marlin for sure.
Okay, I got 2 picks here. The first one is a no-brainer. I'm going Giancarlo Mike Stanton, the only MVP in Marlins history, including Florida Marlins history. An absolute superstar, was rooting for him hard this year to win the World Series. Absolute baller in the playoffs. Unfortunately, he never got the chance to play in the postseason with the Fish. But goes without saying, the most iconic Marlin. He's, in my eyes, he's a future Hall of Famer. Hopefully he wears the Marlins cap. He won the MVP down here, so it makes sense.
Wow, that's an interesting. What hat will he wear in Cooperstown?
I think you would think. Hopefully, it's a Marlins hat. Just to mention, my favorite memory of his is when he broke the scoreboard in left field.
The panel, that's right.
The panel. It was a grand slam against the Rockies. Against Jamie Moyer was pitching, if my memory serves me right. Deep cut there. And my second pick, also a Hall of Famer, a little bit off the wall, but he recorded his 3,000th hit with the Miami Marlins, Ichiro Suzuki. And also his epic moment with the Marlins was also against the Colorado Rockies, ironically enough. So Ichiro is my second pick, and we go back to Eli. Is that right?
No, me.
Back to
Javi.
me.
This one's tough. There's obviously a ton of people that I wanted for this spot, but I think given where we are as a franchise and given the importance he has to this team currently, I'm going with Sandy Alcantara, a guy who has showed up since day one, put in the work, Cy Young winner, Marlins haven't had, the consistency of someone like Jose, but Sandy's as close to Jose as we've gotten since Jose tragically passed away. He's been a stalwart ace of the staff. I think the most humbling thing you see about Sandy is the fact that he goes out there, complete games in an era where there's no more complete games. He's going 200 plus innings when he can, to the point where those long outings probably cost him a season without Tommy John. The fact that he goes out there and puts his body on the line for the organization. I think he's one of those guys that you can really, he's a linchpin of the organization, anchor for the Miami Marlins, someone that the entire minor league system can emulate. So I'm going Sandy Alcantara.
My second pick, catcher JT Realmuto, somebody that he has grown on me even more since he left because of how hard it has been to fill the shoes of anybody remotely like him at that catcher position since he's been gone. Just such a unique player for that spot, so uniquely athletic and well-rounded of a player. And he did get just enough towards his prime as a Marlin before going over to the Phillies in a way that I think he was fully appreciated. He finally got that all-star nod in his final Marlin season right there. I mean, not a whole lot of catchers that have inside the park home runs. He had at least one. He might have had two. I need to double check this. I have like this long list of all Marlins inside the parkers, and he just unlike any other catcher that they've had since then. And it's been a big hole to fill, but I really enjoyed him, even as he was overshadowed by some of the bigger names that most people appreciate. The way that Toad went off the wall with Ichiro, that has empowered me to go off the wall with my third pick.
Let's go.
Nobody's going to see this coming. One of my favorites was Harold Ramirez.
Wow.
People that probably won't even remember Harold Ramirez because it's now been a few years, and he was just a guy. Honestly, there was one real season where he had a big impact as almost an everyday player in 2019, and they got hurt in 2020 almost immediately to start the year. He just grew on me because I was like following his journey really closely. They signed him to a minor league deal, and I'm like, that guy, that pudgy Venezuelan guy that got cut by the Pirates and the Blue Jays. I'm like, I think he's going to be something. And then he turned into something. He shows up at spring training. He's good. He goes to AAA. He crushes it, and he gets called up and stays up for the rest of that 2019 season. For a while, he was challenging some obscure records in terms of hits at the start of a Marlins career. It finished with good numbers. He ends up having the best years of his career right after leaving the Marlins, but still, that's a personal one. Again, I'm not expecting anybody to follow me on this, and if this is going to be open to any sort of voting, I think that's going to hurt me a lot. Harold was my guy, and Harold is somebody. There need to be more Harolds, especially if you're going through these lean years. Got to be more of those lovable role players that just mash.
Eli, that we were doing an exercise before this, just thinking about names. Harold Ramirez did not even enter our universe, our galaxy. There was not that.
I think we mentioned Justin Ruggiano. That's how far back and obscure we were getting. But this is the Mafia at its best. It's just guys naming dudes. Yeah. Okay.
I am going with so as a former pitcher, people that gave me pause and made me, really focus when I was playing were speedsters, guys that could get on base, and I hated facing left-handed batters. I got to go with my guy, D. Gordon. We had his brother on the team this year, Nick Gordon. But D. Gordon was one of those guys that the novelty of him, everyone talked about the stolen bases. We were getting this like super fast player. It honestly gave me, I was like, I hate facing guys like that. I cannot stand that. But he was such a cool, influential Marlin. He crawled so Jazz could walk. Yes. He was one of those types of players that I think the city kind of just gravitated for him. He was a fan favorite because he did the stuff that people wish they could do. People wish they could be fast. They could run around the bases, a helmet flying off, diving head first, stealing bases. So he's one of those table setters. He probably didn't have the Marlins career that we all thought he would, but one of the most important, I think one of the most iconic moments was his home run. And we talked about this in one of our previous episodes with Glenn Geffner. His home run, the first game back after Jose passes away, one of the most iconic Marlins moments, especially at Lone Depot Park. I mean, something that everyone who saw that game will remember forever.
Absolutely. Very, and Willie Mays Hayes vibes from
very Willie Mays Hayes vibes.
I'm going to go a little bit of the Harold Ramirez route. Again, obscure. My first list, when we had Giancarlo and Legends of Dayton, we talked about my soft spot for middle infielders because that's what I grew up playing. My third favorite Miami Marlin of all time is Adeiny Echeverria. Absolutely killer up the middle, smooth with the glove, made the difficult plays look easy and making the easy plays look routine. Also a Cuban guy, so I think he loved playing in Miami. I just respect guys who are defense first, because that's another thing you don't really see a lot of in modern baseball. But I don't know if that's as bad as Harold Ramirez, but Adeiny Echeverria was my guy for those 3, 4, maybe 5 seasons that he was here.
Eli, this is a fun exercise for us. We started thinking about, first of all, what was the first year of the Miami Marlins. So we looked back at 2012, and that was obviously the year where a ton of madness. The park opened up. Ozzie Guillen was the manager. Jose Reyes,
Carlos Zambrano.
We had Heath Bell as a close. We had the Hard Knocks show, like just an absolute disaster of a season for the Marlins. But again, these things are so fun for us because we start recounting players that we hadn't thought about in a really long time. So we appreciate you giving us your insight and those deep cuts.
And Eli, before we let you go here, tell us where the people can find you and follow Fish on First.
I'm the one that oversees all we do, and it's not just me, but there's at least 13, I lose count, 13 or 14 staffers and contributors that keep us running. Anywhere you see the FOF logo, behind it, on all our socials. If you look for Fish on First, wherever you're on, you'll be able to find that. Our website is fishonfirst.com, though, to bring everybody complete coverage of that. It's a true year-round grind. We're recording this moments after the end of the Arizona Fall League, and stuff as granular as that, we're on top of it, seeing what prospects are doing, what the big leaguers are doing, from injury updates to breaking news to rumors to our own analysis and proposals. I mean, we try to handle it from every single angle to keep people involved with all things going on with this team during an off season like this. So yeah, we got all covered at Fish on First, and really excited for next year. It doesn't feel like things could get much more. I don't even know the word for what this past season was. Forgettable. This last season was pretty forgettable, to be honest with everybody. And there's nowhere to go but up from this. So we appreciate everybody that has stuck with us this past year, but I appreciate it even more when you guys give me the opportunity to reach just a couple new Marlins fans that might not know about us, because we're ramping up for next year. And I think we're all energized, whether it's that managerial hire or whether it's the new prospects that are coming through, or the faint hope of not a Juan Soto, but maybe a couple tiers down on the free agent shopping aisle that might come to this team between now and opening day. Yeah, we think about it all year round. So if anybody out there is like that and really wired into this team and wants all the ideas and input that they could get on it, we suggest following along at Fish on First.
I know for I can speak for Eric and myself. We're thankful for you, Eli, because again, a lot of the job is covering games that haven't resulted in wins for the Marlins, and we're all hopeful that Clayton and Peter and Gabe can turn this around. And it's people like you that bring us the coverage that we need to make sure we get this across the finish line. And we're all hopeful that the Lone Depot fields a winner here soon. But Eli, thanks so much for joining the Mafia. I know Petey couldn't be with us here today, but Eric and I we're massive Marlins fans, and we appreciate all the work that you do. Again, everybody go check out Fish on First. I think fishonfirst.com. Follow them on all socials. Eli's got the best coverage in the game.